Hey, Silent Pages fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe. Now stay with us. The story begins. The office of Factum Analytics was a cathedral of precision. Gleaming glass panels stretched from floor to ceiling, reflecting the city's restless heartbeat below. Every desk, every chair, every screen was in its precise place, as if the space itself were a physical manifestation of William's mind. Calculated, controlled, and exact. He moved through it like a conductor, orchestrating crises with the same meticulous care he applied to his data models. Each press release, each media statement, each careful maneuver was designed to neutralize chaos before it could spread. Today, another storm awaited him. The headline flashed on his main monitor: "Corporate malfeasance exposed. Hidden truths emerge." William leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Another client, another delicate empire of carefully curated perception, now threatened by exposure. In his world, information was power only if it was managed, manipulated, and contained. Uncontrolled truth was a contagion, dangerous and unpredictable. And then there was Harper. Her name alone was enough to set his teeth on edge. Harper, the journalist whose intuition and relentless pursuit of facts had dismantled reputations and shattered careers. To William, she was chaos incarnate, the human variable that refused to be quantified. She sniffed out inconsistencies that no algorithm could predict, interrogated contradictions that no data set could resolve. And yet, despite the professional antagonism, he couldn't deny her effectiveness. She worked in a realm he did not trust, a realm he had systematically avoided: raw human instinct. The irony was sharp. William, who prided himself on mastering perception, had begun to notice the fascination stirring beneath his armor. Harper had a way of seeing the cracks in controlled facades, of exposing truths so raw they could neither be spun nor sanitized. That same intensity, he realized with a reluctant respect, made her formidable but dangerous. The office door slid open. Ethan, his senior analyst and longtime confidant, entered with the ease of someone who had memorized the cadence of William's schedule. "Sir, the Harper article is live. It's already trending," he said, holding a tablet as if it were a shield. William's jaw tightened. He rose and moved to the panoramic window overlooking the city, his reflection merging with the skyline. The streets below teemed with life, unpredictable and messy, a chaotic dance of humanity that he usually observed only through the lens of statistics. But Harper operated within that chaos effortlessly. She didn't just report facts. She lived them, breathed them, and used them to dismantle the illusions of order he so cherished. Ethan waited, uneasy. "Do you want me to initiate containment protocols?" "Yes," William replied, voice calm, almost clinical. "All angles, every potential response. Projections, talking points, counter-narratives. I want a full simulation within the hour. And keep an eye on her movements. Predict her next step if you can." Ethan nodded and left. The office returned to silence, the hum of computers and servers the only sound. William's mind raced, a relentless algorithm looping through probabilities. He understood numbers, trends, and behaviors better than anyone else. But Harper was outside every pattern he had ever learned. She was unpredictability given form, and he could not control her, not fully. He walked to his private library, the walls lined with volumes of psychology, sociology, and communication theory. Here was knowledge. Here was order. Here was the illusion that everything could be managed, except Harper. She challenged every assumption, every model, every carefully constructed defense. And yet, beneath the irritation, beneath the professional antagonism, there was intrigue. William had begun to recognize that perhaps understanding her, harnessing her, could offer more than mere defense. Perhaps chaos could be an asset. Perhaps the human factor, long dismissed as a liability, was the very thing that could elevate his work beyond cold calculations. He pressed his hand to the glass, feeling the faint vibration of the city below. The battle lines were clear: control versus truth, order versus chaos, calculation versus instinct. And in the eye of this storm, Harper stood unflinching, unpredictable, unstoppable. William exhaled slowly, letting the tension settle into a sharpened focus. The crisis demanded precision, but the challenge Harper presented demanded something else: adaptation, intuition, and perhaps, in some unlikely way, understanding. For the first time, he considered that to defeat or contain the chaos, he might first need to step into it. The city moved, indifferent and alive, beneath the citadel of glass and steel. William adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, and returned to the desk where data waited patiently. Algorithms humming, simulations ready. The game was on, and Harper had already made the first move. William stared at the endless rows of spreadsheets, graphs, and trend analyses sprawled across his main monitor, but none of it calmed the gnawing unease in his chest. The client's crisis had escalated beyond mere statistics, and for the first time in years, he considered a course of action that felt reckless. Harper, the one person who had consistently defied his control. Against every instinct, he drafted a proposal. Hire her, not to investigate, not to expose, but as a consultant in authenticity, tasked with teaching him to think like the truth itself. It was absurd. It was dangerous. And yet, somehow, it was the only logical step left. The next morning, Harper arrived at the sleek glass doors of Factum Analytics. Her stride was confident, eyes sharp, scanning the environment as though it were a puzzle she intended to solve. She wore a tailored jacket over jeans, an outfit that balanced professionalism with irreverence, perfectly encapsulating her approach to life. William rose to greet her, a measured smile fixed on his face, but beneath it, a twinge of apprehension lingered. He had spent his career managing chaos, and here it was, embodied in living form. "William," she said, voice crisp but not unkind, "I assume this isn't a social call." He inclined his head. "Not at all. I need you to teach me something my algorithms cannot predict." Her eyes narrowed. "And you expect me to step into your office, into your world of absolute control, and what? Train you to feel the truth?" "That's one way to put it," he replied, gesturing toward the bank of monitors. "I want to understand the human element, the unpredictability, how intuition, conscience, and transparency affect perception. I need you to show me what my data can't." Harper's expression shifted, curiosity flickering across her features. "And in exchange?" she asked. "Freedom," Williams said carefully. "You have full autonomy. You decide what to observe, what to report to me, how much access you want. No interference from my team, no restrictions." Her lips curved in a half-smile. "You're asking me to teach a master of control to embrace uncertainty. Interesting. Dangerous, but interesting." She paused. "I'll do it. On one condition. You follow my guidance without translating it into a formula, without trying to control it. You let yourself experience the truth, not manage it." William's heart skipped a beat. To surrender control, even partially, was unthinkable, but the alternative was watching the client's empire crumble. He nodded, committing himself to a strange, uncomfortable alliance. "Agreed," he said, voice steady, masking the turbulence beneath. The first week was a test of endurance. Harper took him out of the office and into the streets, to meetings with employees, local witnesses, and even skeptical customers. William, accustomed to analyzing everything through dashboards and predictive models, found himself floundering. Every interaction defied his expectations. People spoke with nuance, emotion, and contradiction. No dataset could encompass the messiness of human experience. Harper watched him with quiet amusement. "You're uncomfortable," she noted, as he hesitated before a small business owner explaining a complaint about the client. "I'm recalibrating," William muttered. Inside, panic and fascination warred. For the first time, he had no framework to rely upon, no algorithm to fall back on. He had only intuition, his own, poorly trained, and Harper's guidance. As the days unfolded, William began to see cracks in his own perception. Harper's questions weren't just probing the client's integrity, they were probing him. She asked why he trusted data over people, why he feared unpredictability, why he equated order with morality. And with each question, William felt a subtle shift, a loosening of his rigid certainty. Meanwhile, Ethan and Laura, watching from the sidelines, grew increasingly restless. Ethan whispered caution, warning that Harper's influence could destabilize William's control over the company. Laura, ever the opportunist, saw leverage, an opening to manipulate narratives for her own gain. Yet Harper moved unfazed, a constant reminder that human intuition often overpowered calculated strategy. By the end of the first week, a strange rhythm had emerged. William no longer approached the world purely through numbers. He began to listen, to watch, to feel. Harper, meanwhile, began to respect the precision with which he managed the chaos she introduced. The tension between control and authenticity, between logic and intuition, was no longer just a battleground. It was a bridge. And as William left the office that evening, walking through the city streets alive with unpredictable energy, he allowed himself a rare thought. Perhaps embracing the truth, in all its untidy, human complexity, could be the most precise strategy of all. The morning light slanted through the panoramic windows of Factum Analytics, illuminating rows of monitors, servers, and meticulously stacked files. William stood at the edge of his office, observing the city below with his usual analytical detachment, but something had shifted. Harper was no longer just an irritant, an unpredictable force to contain. She was now a collaborator, a consultant whose very presence forced him to question the foundation of everything he believed. "William, you're not going to get this sitting at your desk," Harper said, her tone sharp, decisive, as she strode past him toward the elevators. "We need to leave this citadel of data. People, real human beings, they're not algorithms. You can't just predict their reactions with probabilities." He hesitated, sleeves rolled up, fingers brushing over his tie as though it could ground him. The instinct to object, to insist on control, clawed at him. Yet he followed. The streets outside were alive with a chaotic pulse he had long ignored, a rhythm that couldn't be charted, predicted, or manipulated. Harper moved through it effortlessly, observing nuances, gestures, expressions that defied statistical categorization. Their first stop was a mid-sized factory, one of the client's suppliers. Workers leaned over conveyor belts, speaking to one another in tones tinged with both fatigue and pride. William listened, cataloging every word internally, searching for a pattern, a breach, a statistic he could quantify. Harper, however, approached the situation differently. She knelt beside a young technician, asking about his experience, his concerns, his perspective on the client's recent controversies. Her questions were simple, yet disarming. The technician's eyes lit up. His responses were honest, unfiltered, alive. "You see," Harper said quietly, glancing at William. "Data can tell you what happened yesterday, what the trend is, but it doesn't tell you why someone feels that way. It doesn't reveal the choices they make when no one is watching. You need to step into the human element." William's mind whirred. He wanted to create equations, models, simulations, but here, in this noisy, unpredictable factory, the human element refused to conform. Every answer, every glance, every subtle gesture was a variable he could not reduce. And yet, there was clarity in the chaos, a kind of truth that no spreadsheet could ever provide. Later, Harper took him to a series of interviews with clients, customers, and even critics. She coaxed stories out of them, observed reactions, noticed inconsistencies that William's algorithms had overlooked. With every interaction, William felt his control slipping, and yet, paradoxically, a sense of understanding began to emerge. He saw patterns in unpredictability, coherence in human inconsistency. At one point, William attempted to regain control, pulling out a tablet and referencing Harper's past articles, her investigations, her social media activity. "I can analyze your methods, your past decisions," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of curiosity and defensiveness. "If I understand your motives, your behavior, I can predict your next move." Harper laughed softly, a sound that carried both amusement and challenge. "You can try, William. But intuition, ethics, and conscience aren't variables you can measure. You can't predict empathy, loyalty, or courage. They exist outside your equations." The tension between them was palpable. William, the master of control, now found himself challenged not by chaos alone, but by truth, a truth that could not be quantified. Harper's presence was an irritant and a revelation, forcing him to confront his own limitations, to acknowledge the emotional and moral dimensions of the world he had long reduced to numbers. By the end of the day, they returned to Factum Analytics. The office was silent, but the atmosphere was charged with the unspoken acknowledgement that the dynamic between them had shifted. William, for the first time in years, felt uncertain, vulnerable even. Harper had not just disrupted his workflow, she had disrupted his worldview. Yet in that disruption, a strange possibility emerged, a path forward where control and authenticity could coexist, where intuition could inform strategy, and where the human element, once ignored, could become his greatest asset. William realized he had no choice but to surrender a fraction of his control, to trust, to observe, and to learn from the one variable he could not manage, Harper herself. The conference room at Factum Analytics was sterile and immaculate, the air conditioned to a precise 72 degrees, yet the atmosphere between William and Harper crackled with tension. For weeks, they had been navigating uncharted territory. He, a master of control and calculated prediction, and she, the unpredictable force of human intuition. Today, the stakes were higher than ever, a public statement for the client that could either repair or ruin their reputation. Harper spread her notes across the polished table, sketches of human interactions, anecdotes from employees, emotional reactions she had gathered from communities affected by the client's actions. "Facts alone won't save them," she said, tapping one sheet. "You can spin data, you can hide statistics, you can run projections, but people will see through it if there's no authenticity. They sense when you're lying, William." They feel it in every word you don't speak. William leaned back, arms crossed, a practiced calm masking the whirlwind inside. And you think I've ignored authenticity? He asked, voice steady but edged with curiosity. I've managed perceptions for decades. I understand how people respond. I just quantify it differently than you do. Harper smiled faintly, a mixture of challenge and understanding. It's not about managing perceptions. It's about being truthful enough that the perception aligns naturally. You can't force it, you have to live it. The paradox unsettled him. For the first time, he realized that Harper wasn't just teaching him a strategy. She was teaching him a philosophy. She was challenging the very framework of his mind, forcing him to consider vulnerability not as a liability, but as a tool. They began the task of crafting the client's statement together. Harper guided him through the nuances of tone, phrasing, and emotional resonance. She asked him to recount personal stories, his own experiences in corporate management, decisions that had weighed heavily on him, failures he rarely acknowledged. At first, he resisted, analyzing the impact of each disclosure, measuring the risk in percentages. But gradually, under Harper's persistent yet gentle prompting, he began to share more openly. I didn't anticipate this, he admitted quietly, eyes not meeting hers, voice tinged with unease. I always thought detachment was necessary. That emotion clouds judgment. Harper placed a hand on the table, near his, but not touching. Emotion isn't the enemy, William. It's information. It tells you more than numbers ever can, if you learn to interpret it correctly. In that moment, William caught a glimpse of something he had long ignored. Human unpredictability was not merely a challenge to be managed. It was a source of insight, depth, and connection. And as he looked at Harper, a strange awareness took root. She too had vulnerabilities. Her relentless pursuit of truth, her confidence in human intuition, was paired with an unspoken fragility, a dedication born of personal stakes and past challenges he had yet to uncover. The day stretched into evening, and the pair walked through a quiet part of the city, reviewing the drafts and narratives. Harper stopped at a crosswalk, turning to him. You see, William, prediction has limits. You can analyze data endlessly, but people, they react in ways that can't always be forecasted. And when you embrace that, you start to understand them and yourself. For the first time in years, William felt uncertain and alive. The walls he had built around his mind and heart, the layers of algorithms and logic, were cracking. Harper had not just shown him a new way to work. She had shown him a new way to perceive the world, to see beyond control, to sense authenticity. As they returned to the office, the tension between them had shifted into something subtler, more complex. Respect, curiosity, and an unspoken attraction intertwined with their professional collaboration. William realized that he could no longer predict Harper in the way he predicted markets or media. And perhaps that was precisely the point. The human variable, messy and uncontrollable, was not a threat to mastery. It was the very key to it. For the first time, he entertained a thought that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Embracing unpredictability did not weaken him. It might make him stronger. And in the space between chaos and control, between truth and calculation, a fragile, budding connection began to take shape, one that neither data nor algorithm could measure. The gala hall glittered with crystal chandeliers, polished marble, and the muted hum of high-profile guests exchanging pleasantries and calculated compliments. William stood at the edge of the room, impeccably dressed, a glass of champagne in hand, every inch the image of control. Yet beneath the tailored suit and poised expression, a storm brewed, a tension born not from the optics of the event, but from the presence of Harper. She had arrived an hour earlier, radiant in a simple black dress that defied the ostentation around them. Her gaze, sharp and unflinching, sought him out immediately, cutting through his carefully constructed composure. As she approached, a subtle shift occurred in the room. William, accustomed to controlling narratives, found himself disarmed. William, Harper said softly, her voice a calm counterpoint to the glittering chaos surrounding them. I've gathered information you might not have anticipated. He smiled, masking the rapid pulse of anticipation. I trust your instincts, he said, though internally he knew this encounter would challenge every ounce of control he had ever exercised. They moved through the crowd, exchanging observations, subtly guiding conversations toward topics of interest. Every interaction was a test of synergy between intuition and strategy, control and unpredictability. Harper asked questions that pried into the client's true motives, their ethical lapses, their missteps, all while maintaining the illusion of casual social engagement. William followed, sometimes reluctantly, absorbing her insights, marveling at her ability to uncover truths he could not measure with algorithms. As the evening progressed, The professional tension between them began to shift into something charged, something electric. In a quiet corner, removed from the main throng of guests, Harper and William found themselves alone, the muted glow of chandeliers reflecting in their eyes. Words were unnecessary at first. The energy between them spoke volumes. When William brushed back a strand of her hair that had fallen into her face, the touch lingered longer than expected. Their eyes met, unguarded, and in that moment, the distance built over weeks of collaboration collapsed. The first kiss was sudden, a collision of curiosity, restraint, and undeniable attraction. Harper's lips pressed against his, tentative but insistent, a spark igniting a fire neither could deny. William's hands moved instinctively, holding and grounding, yet his mind raced. Control, consequences, reputation, all the factors he normally weighed, now irrelevant in the heat of the moment. But reality intruded swiftly. Harper pulled back slightly, a frown flickering across her face as she withdrew from the embrace. Her hand brushed against his chest in a gesture of caution. "William," she whispered, voice firm yet tinged with vulnerability. "There's something you need to see." She led him to a quiet alcove where her tablet displayed a newly discovered piece of evidence, an undeniable document revealing that their client had knowingly concealed critical information. William's heart sank. Here was the proof that contradicted everything he had worked to defend. His control, his carefully calculated strategies, had brought them to the edge of exposure. I knew this could exist," William said, a twinge of frustration lacing his normally calm voice. "But I didn't expect it to fall into your hands so cleanly." Harper's eyes met his. "I don't need it clean, William. I need you to face it, to see it as it is. Control cannot replace conscience. Numbers cannot erase consequences." The kiss, the intimacy, the rush of connection, all collided with the professional imperative that now demanded his full attention. William's pulse thrummed with conflicting forces, desire and duty, attraction and ethics, control and the uncomfortable, unavoidable truth. He realized, painfully and profoundly, that the person who had challenged every notion of certainty in his life was also the one forcing him to confront the one variable he could not calculate: human integrity. Harper had not just disrupted his world, she had illuminated it, revealing the tension between loyalty to control and loyalty to truth. And in that charged corner of the gala, amid glittering lights and whispered conversations, William understood something critical. The path forward would not be guided by data alone, nor by algorithms. It would be shaped by trust, courage, and a willingness to embrace the unpredictable, qualities that Harper possessed in abundance, and that he, for the first time, felt compelled to cultivate within himself. The morning after the gala, William sat alone in his office. The city sprawled beneath him like a living, breathing organism, full of consequences he could no longer neatly calculate. The document Harper had uncovered lingered on his desk, glowing from the tablet screen, a stark testament to deception that he had long tried to control and conceal. Every instinct he had cultivated over decades screamed to bury it, to manipulate the narrative, to protect his client and, in doing so, protect his own meticulously constructed empire. But Harper's voice echoed in his mind, unwavering and sharp. Control cannot replace conscience. Numbers cannot erase consequences. He picked up his phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. She had already left the office, refusing to compromise her principles, leaving William to wrestle alone with the collision of control and truth. Hours later, Harper returned, her expression unyielding. She stepped into his office without knocking, a breach of his usual order, and laid a printed copy of the evidence on his desk. "You have a choice," she said, calm but resolute. "You can publish this, or I will. Either way, the truth comes out. But if you do it yourself, you retain some control over how it's told." William's mind raced. Every algorithm he had built, every predictive model he had relied upon, screaming that releasing this information would be catastrophic. Stock prices, client trust, media backlash, it all predicted ruin. And yet, for the first time, those predictions felt hollow. They measured finances, not conscience, reactions, not integrity. I can't," he said finally, his voice tight, caught between his sense of duty to protect his company and the gnawing awareness that protecting it now would betray something far more essential: himself. The data, everything points to disaster. Harper's eyes softened, but only slightly. "William, disaster isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in lives, trust, and the consequences of lies. You know it. I know it. You can hide behind your numbers, or you can stand with the truth. But if you don't act, I will." Her words struck him like a physical blow. He had built his career on certainty, on the power of controlled perception. And yet, here was a force that defied control, that ignored probabilities, that demanded honesty above all else. His pulse quickened, and for the first time, fear wasn't about financial loss. It was about moral failure. William sank into his chair, pressing his palms to his eyes. Memories of past decisions flashed before him. Moments where he had rationalized, manipulated, and calculated outcomes to preserve image over integrity. And now, confronted with Harper's unwavering resolve, he felt the weight of every ethical compromise he had ever made. I can't let them suffer. Or you, he murmured to himself, glancing at Harper, who stood silently but insistently. Her presence was a mirror, reflecting back the man he could no longer deny he had become. Finally, after long minutes of internal struggle, he straightened, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Fine, he said, voice trembling but firm. I'll do it. I'll publish it. But I need you to help me do it the right way. Harper's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. Then let's make it honest, William. Completely honest. No spin. No excuses. As they began drafting the statement, every word deliberate, every phrasing scrutinized, William felt the familiar walls of control crumble. The numbers, the projections, the algorithms, all of it seemed irrelevant now. This was a reckoning not with the market, but with his conscience. With Harper guiding him, he started to see a path forward that required courage, integrity, and a willingness to embrace vulnerability, a path he had never taken before. By the end of the day, the first drafts were ready, polished but undeniably truthful. William realized that the crisis had stripped him bare, forcing him to confront the gap between who he had been and who he wanted to be. And in that moment, standing beside Harper, he felt an unfamiliar sense of liberation, the freedom that comes from making the right choice, even when it defies every calculation he had ever trusted. The ethical crisis had not destroyed him. Instead, it had begun the slow, difficult process of transformation, revealing that some truths could not be managed, only acknowledged, and that the cost of control could never outweigh the power of integrity. William sat alone in the darkened corner of his office, the city lights outside casting fragmented reflections across the glass walls. The evidence Harper had unearthed lay on his desk like a gauntlet thrown down, impossible to ignore, yet equally impossible to reconcile with the world he had meticulously engineered. For hours, he had run simulations, analyzed outcomes, calculated every conceivable risk, and every algorithm screamed the same warning. Release this information, and ruin was inevitable. Yet, amid the precision of numbers and probability charts, something irrational stirred, a pulse of human reality that refused to be quantified. He thought of the employees, the families, the lives affected by the truth. He thought of Harper, standing unwaveringly for what she knew was right. And for the first time, the neat, ordered framework of his mind could not contain the storm of conscience and emotion pressing against it. He tried to suppress the feeling, to return to his algorithms, but every spreadsheet, every predictive model, seemed hollow. Numbers could not measure guilt, could not account for moral failure, could not anticipate the relief that comes from doing what is ethically correct. William felt the walls of control crumble around him, leaving him raw and exposed. A knock at the office door made him start. Harper entered without waiting for permission, her presence both comforting and confrontational. You're overthinking it, she said, stepping closer. You've spent your life trying to manage outcomes, but this is beyond calculation. It's human. It's real. William's hands shook slightly as he gestured to the spreadsheets, to the charts. I can't just ignore the data. Every metric says disaster. Disaster measured in money or reputation isn't the same as disaster measured in integrity, Harper replied. Her gaze was unwavering. You've built systems to predict everything, but you can't predict conscience. You can't calculate courage. You can't quantify what's right. Her words pierced through the last vestiges of his analytical armor. For the first time, he realized that his algorithms, his years of predictive mastery, lacked a variable he had never accounted for: morality, conscience, humanity. William leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. Memories flooded in, decisions made purely for control, manipulations to shape perception, moments when he had prioritized outcome over ethics. And now, confronted with the human cost of silence, the weight of his choices pressed down with unbearable force. I've been wrong, he admitted quietly, more to himself than to Harper. All my calculations, they've never accounted for this. For human consequences. For you. Harper stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his desk, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile bridge being rebuilt between them. It's never too late, William, she said softly. You can still choose the right path. He opened his eyes, the decision crystallizing within him. Every algorithm, every predictive model, every calculated risk, all of it dissolved in the face of what he knew was right. He could not protect the client at the expense of truth. He could not preserve his reputation by compromising his conscience. With a deep breath, William rose from his chair, the city skyline stretching before him like a challenge and an opportunity at once. "I will do it," he said, voice steady now, though filled with the weight of consequence. "I will release the truth. Fully, without spin, without concealment. I will face whatever comes, and I will do it honestly." Harper's lips curved into a subtle, approving smile. "Then let's make it right, William. Together." And in that moment, the last walls of control shattered. William felt an unfamiliar exhilaration, the freedom of breaking the algorithmic chains that had bound him, the liberation of embracing imperfection, unpredictability, and humanity. The system he had built to dominate outcomes had failed, but in its place arose something far more powerful: conscience, courage, and the willingness to act with integrity, even when it defied every formula he had ever trusted. For the first time in years, William was not merely a master of data. He was a human being, capable of error, capable of courage, capable of truth. And with Harper at his side, he knew he could navigate the uncertain, chaotic world of consequences with a clarity he had never experienced before. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of William's office, casting long, sharp lines across the polished floor. Today, there would be no spreadsheets, no predictive models, no simulations to guide him. Today, he would confront the truth itself. Harper stood nearby, calm and resolute, her eyes reflecting both expectation and quiet trust. She had become more than a colleague. She was the moral compass he had long lacked, the human variable his algorithms could never account for. William took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the choice pressing on him like a physical force. Every instinct screamed caution. Every metric warned of ruin, financial collapse, reputational annihilation, the wrath of clients who had relied on his system to safeguard their interests. And yet, beneath the fear, something stronger was rising: clarity, integrity, the recognition that no algorithm could replace conscience. He activated the company's broadcast system, the large screens across the corporate network flickering to life. Employees, clients, journalists, all watched, anticipating another carefully crafted statement of controlled spin. But William would give them none of that. His hands shook slightly as he stepped up to the podium, the hum of anticipation washing over him. "My name is William Hawthorne," he began, his voice resonant but steady. "For years, I have built a system designed to manage information, to control narratives, to protect my clients from the consequences of exposure. I believed that control was the highest virtue, that data could replace conscience, and algorithms could safeguard truth. I was wrong." A murmur rippled through the room. Harper stood behind him, silent but unwavering, her presence anchoring him to the courage he needed. "I have recently been presented with information regarding one of our clients that is indisputably true and yet contradicts every representation we have provided. For too long, I have allowed the pursuit of control to overshadow the pursuit of integrity. Today, I choose differently. Today, I acknowledge the truth, fully and without obfuscation. All efforts to conceal, manipulate, or manage perception are hereby set aside. The public, the media, and the individuals affected deserve honesty, unfiltered, uncalculated, and complete." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, both for the audience and for himself. Every calculated instinct fought against the vulnerability of honesty, but he continued, "I stand here not as the CEO of Factum Analytics, not as a master of data, but as a human being who has learned that integrity is not negotiable. This decision may carry consequences I cannot predict. I may lose clients, reputation, and influence, but I will not, and cannot, ignore the truth. It is my responsibility, and it is my obligation." The silence that followed was almost tangible, broken only by the quiet hum of technology and the soft intake of breath from the audience. Harper's gaze met his, and in that moment, the tension that had defined their relationship, control versus truth, calculation versus conscience, transformed into mutual recognition. She had guided him to this point, and he had finally embraced it. "I apologize for the mistakes of the past," he concluded, his voice steady despite the vulnerability. "And I commit to a future where truth is not just acknowledged, but honored. Let this be the standard by which we move forward." As the broadcast ended, William felt a profound, almost dizzying release. The algorithms, the forecasts, the data-driven simulations, they had all failed him. But in their place, something immeasurably powerful had taken root: the unpredictable, uncontrollable force of human integrity. Harper stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "You did it," she said softly, almost reverently. "You chose the truth. And in doing so, you finally chose yourself." William exhaled, the tension draining from his body, replaced by a fragile, luminous sense of freedom. For the first time in his life, he had acted without the safety net of control, without the certainty of calculation. And yet, in that uncertainty, he felt more alive, more human, more whole than he had ever imagined possible. In that moment, the path forward was no longer defined by data, by algorithms, or by control. It was defined by courage, trust, and the willingness to embrace truth, however uncomfortable, however unpredictable. And beside him, Harper was proof that human connection, compassion, integrity, and authenticity was a force far greater than any system could ever calculate. Months had passed since William's unprecedented act of truth. The world had watched, commented, and debated. Factum Analytics, once the epitome of precision and control, had been shaken to its core. Clients had left, headlines had questioned his judgment, and financial analysts had scoured every metric for evidence of collapse. Yet, despite the storm, a curious transformation had begun to unfold. The company that William had built to control narratives was slowly evolving into something entirely new, something more human. The office, once austere and sterile, now buzzed with a different energy. Teams collaborated not simply to manage perception, but to ensure integrity in every message. Projects were infused with empathy, campaigns grounded in transparency. Employees were encouraged to engage with communities, to understand lived experiences, and to incorporate honesty into strategy. The numbers still mattered, but they no longer ruled. Humanity did. William walked through the open-plan workspace, pausing to greet employees whose faces had once seemed like mere data points in his calculations. He observed discussions not about metrics or forecasts, but about ethics, responsibility, and authentic connection. Harper, sitting at a corner table, laughed lightly as she explained a nuanced approach to crisis communication to a group of junior staff. Watching her, William felt a quiet pride, not in controlling outcomes, but in witnessing people embrace the truth. He paused at the window, gazing at the city below. The skyline seemed different now, not a grid of numbers and probabilities, but a living landscape of choices, consequences, and opportunities for integrity. His gaze softened, tracing the patterns of human behavior that no algorithm could fully predict, yet which now formed the true measure of success. A knock on the glass made him turn. Harper entered, holding a folder containing client updates and community feedback. "The new approach is working," she said, her tone matter-of-fact but tinged with warmth. "People respond to authenticity. They trust it, and our clients are slowly realizing that transparency doesn't destroy reputation. It builds it." William nodded, a smile forming. "It's not just about the clients anymore," he said. "It's about us. About creating something sustainable, meaningful, and, finally, human. I never thought I'd say this, but I think we found a better way to do business." Harper placed the folder on the desk, their hands brushing briefly. A spark of connection that carried the unspoken acknowledgement of shared struggles and triumphs. "You've changed," she said softly. "Not just the company, but you. Factum Analytics isn't the same, and neither are you." He looked at her, the weight of past control lifting, replaced by trust, respect, and a budding sense of partnership. "I've learned that human judgment, conscience, and empathy, those are variables my algorithms can't calculate," he admitted. "And yet, they're the ones that matter most." As the day unfolded, William met with clients and staff, navigating the complexities of the new landscape he had chosen. Every decision, every message, every interaction reflected a philosophy he had once dismissed as chaotic or inefficient, but which now felt undeniably powerful: transparency, authenticity, and accountability. By evening, he found himself alone in the office with Harper once again. The city lights glittered like scattered data points, yet William no longer saw them as mere numbers. They were stories, lives, and choices, all part of a tapestry that demanded respect for truth and human experience. "I never imagined this would feel right," he said quietly, leaning back in his chair. "To run a company and still feel like I'm living." Harper smiled, her eyes reflecting the subtle glow of trust and admiration. "You're learning that life, like business, isn't about control. It's about connection. And you've finally embraced it." For the first time in decades, William felt the harmony of purpose and conscience. The new landscape was uncharted, unpredictable, and raw, but it was alive, just like the people who populated it. And in that truth, he discovered a profound satisfaction far greater than any algorithmic success. A business, and a life built on integrity, courage, and the undeniable power of humanity. The early morning was quiet, almost serene, with the city still wrapped in a gentle haze. William and Harper walked side by side through a small park far from the towering glass offices and the hum of the corporate world. The chaos of press releases, board meetings, and client demands felt like a distant memory. Here, there were no algorithms, no controlled narratives, only the soft rustle of leaves, the occasional chirp of a bird, and the rhythmic cadence of their footsteps on the winding path. William glanced at Harper, her expression open and thoughtful, and felt a warmth he had long forgotten in the cold corridors of data and metrics. For years, he had measured the world in probabilities, outcomes, and risks, never allowing the unpredictability of human emotion to factor into his decisions. But Harper had taught him a truth that no spreadsheet could ever quantify. Life, like morality, could not be reduced to numbers. It had to be felt, experienced, and embraced fully, even when it defied logic. "I never thought I'd find peace outside of the numbers," William admitted, his voice low, carrying a sincerity that surprised even him. "I spent so long trying to predict everything, to control everything, and all that control only isolated me. I didn't see the real world, the one that isn't neat or calculable." Harper smiled softly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "You were afraid of uncertainty," she said, "afraid of imperfection. But you've learned to see it differently. You've learned that truth and connection, that's where life exists." They stopped at a small bench overlooking a quiet fountain, the water sparkling in the morning light. William turned to face her fully, feeling the gravity of the moment pressing gently but insistently on his chest. "Harper, I don't just respect what you've taught me professionally. I don't just value your insight or your courage. I want you in every part of my life. Not as a consultant, not as an ally, but as a partner. Fully." Harper's eyes widened slightly, the vulnerability she had always hidden beneath her journalistic armor shining through for a fleeting second. Then she smiled, that same mix of warmth and challenge that had first drawn him in. "William, I think I've been waiting to hear that my whole life," she whispered. He took her hands in his, feeling the electricity of their shared experiences, the struggles, the arguments, the breakthroughs, the truths revealed. "You've shown me how to live without formulas, how to act without control, and how to trust in people again. I can't imagine going forward without you." Her grip tightened, a silent affirmation of what words alone could never fully convey. "Then don't," she said simply, leaning closer. Time seemed to pause as their foreheads touched, their breaths mingling, the world beyond the park fading into irrelevance. William felt the last vestiges of his old, rigid self dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of completeness. No data could measure this moment, no analysis could predict it. It was real, unpredictable, and entirely theirs. Finally, their lips met in a kiss that was both gentle and unwavering, sealing not just a promise of love, but a recognition of the journey they had undertaken together. In that kiss, William embraced imperfection, uncertainty, and human truth, and for the first time, he felt entirely free. As they pulled back slightly, William smiled, a lightness in his voice that mirrored the morning itself. "You've changed everything, and I think you're my greatest truth." Harper laughed softly, the sound mingling with the fountain's gentle splashes. "Then don't let me go," she replied, her voice steady, confident, and full of affection. And so they sat together, side by side, far from the calculations, far from control, in a world measured only by their shared honesty and the love they had fought to recognize. The citadel of data, the algorithms, the crises, they no longer defined William. He had discovered the unpredictable, immeasurable power of living and loving authentically, and with Harper at his side, he knew he would never return to the cold certainties of the past. In that quiet morning light, two hearts, once guided by logic and circumstance, finally found their truth, and in that truth, a new beginning stretched endlessly before them. Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments.